What's up guys, Riley here back with another video, and today I'm going to be talking about how to simulate the Super Bowl, which is up and coming in the next few days here on Sunday. So it should be a pretty interesting game, but first let's start off and take a look at the data that we're going to need for this simulation. I'm actually going to be just taking one sheet of data from Football Reference, Pro Football Reference specifically, and if you go to the 2020 season page and just go to schedule, you get a nice little list of all the results this season, and we're actually just be deriving the simulations from this sheet. So we're not going to be needing anything else. So it should be a pretty simple model, but a nice one to build a foundation on for a more complex simulation model. So let's get right into it here and take a look at the actual sheet itself. So we're starting off with this, and the way we're going to derive our ratings, of course, which is the first question you need to ask yourself, when you want to simulate a sports like a game in general, is okay, what am I going to base the simulations off of? Which ratings am I going to use? And how am I going to calculate these ratings? Now today, like I said, we're going to be building a pretty simple model, and likewise the ratings are also going to be very simple, and we're just going to be basing them off of points for and points against. Now looking at the actual structure of this data sheet itself, the teams are split into a winner-loser rather than a home-away, but it really shouldn't change the way that we have to pull this data in at all, and I'll show you exactly how in a second. So first off, I've made a rating sheet, which I tend to do, just a nice little sheet that kind of compiles all the ratings that we're going to use together. And in this sheet, of course, we have the teams, then we're going to pull in points for and points against. And the way we're going to do this, just based off of the structure of the sheet, we're going to need two sum-if statements. So one of them is going to pull in points for when that given team won the game, and then the other one's going to pull in points for when the given team lost the game, and then we're just going to add those two numbers together and divide by 16. So as you can see here, just for reference, the range is going to be data E2 through E257, and the criteria is going to be, of course, the given team. In this case, it's the Arizona Cardinals, and the sum range is going to be I2 through I257. So remember those two columns, the E and I columns in data, because we're going to take a look at them quick. So the E column just represents the winning team, and then the I column is the amount of points scored by the winning team, and that's just a simple way to sum those together. And then we're same logic with the team when they lost the game. We're just summing the amount of points scored when the given team was on the loser side. So that's how you calculate points for, and then just, of course, like I said, divide by 16. So it's the amount of games played by each NFL team, and we're just using regular season data. Then points against, very same logic, except rather than taking the points scored by the given team, of course, we want to take the points allowed or the points scored by the opponent. So taking a look at the first sum-if here just for reference, we see it's the same range, same criteria, except this time we're pulling the opposite data. So we're actually pulling data J, which represents the points for the losing team, and this is, of course, when we're referencing the winning team. So we just want to pull the amount of points for the losing team when the given team won, and then vice versa. We want to pull the amount of points for the winning team when this given team lost, and that's how we get this average points against. And then, of course, we sum those two together and divide by 16, and we get a 22.9. Now we're also going to scale this data to 100, and to do that we need to calculate the average amount of points scored in a game by all teams this season. And to get that number, we simply average both these two columns, and then we just average those two numbers themselves because it's an equal amount of teams, and then we get 24.8 roughly. 24.76 I think is the more specific, but that's fine. We'll just use the 24.8 in this sense, and that's how we or that's the number we're going to use for average anyways. And just keep in mind the significant figures. So it's significant numbers. Standard deviation will be one as well that we'll use, and I'll talk about that in a second. But just to scale to 100, of course, this is something I've done many times throughout my videos, many times throughout my models. I use it for all my professional models as well that I actually do sell and keep up to date and all that. So just a little technique I like to use to display the numbers. But essentially what we're doing is displaying them in relation to average, where 100 is average. So we take the actual number, which is points for on average for the Cardinals, divide by the average points for throughout the entire season by all teams, and then we multiply by 100. So any number above 100 will represent a number greater than average. Any number lower than 100 will represent a number lower than average. And in this sense, since it's an offensive rating, of course, the better teams will be higher, where vice versa defensively, the better teams will have lower ratings. and of course, in turn, we'll have a lower points against on average than average. So that's the simple logic behind those ratings there. But we can take this a step further, and outside of just points for and against, we can start to adjust for the opponent's strength. And the way I'm going to do that is by using those very ratings we just created. So we're going to unhide this set of columns here, and it looks like a bit of information there, but really it's not too complex at all. It is just pulling in the winning team's offensive defensive ratings and also the losing team's offensive defensive ratings, and then we're just adjusting the points for by the ratings of the opposition. So we have an index match formula here, pulling in the winning team's offensive ratings from that very sheet that we just compiled them on, which is of course the rating sheet. So you guys can take a look at that formula there, just a simple index match, pulling in those ratings for the winning team and the losing team. Now to actually calculate the adjusted number, we're just going to multiply the points for or points scored by the given team. In this sense, it's the Chiefs, and then we're going to multiply that number by 100 divided by R2, which represents the scaled defensive rating of the Texans, or the opposition defensive rating. So we're adjusting it for the opposition defense. So multiplying the points forward by 100 divided by the defensive rating of the opposition, and that's how we get an adjusted points for number for the Chiefs, which actually drops by about 5 points, and that's due to the high defensive rating for the Texans implying a bad defense, so 70% worse than average. That's what results in the 29 number for the Chiefs. And then same logic applied to points allowed. This time we're just adjusting the amount of points the given team allowed. In this sense, the Texans scored 20, so the Chiefs allowed 20. And then we're adjusting that for the opposition offense, which we're essentially adjusting for how good the opposition offense was. And then we want to get to a number where we are essentially saying, based on the amount of points that the Texans scored in this scenario and based on how good their offense was, this is how many points that the Chiefs would have allowed against an average team. And adjusting for average results in a number of 21, so just a 1 point increase. But logically that makes sense because the Texans were based on our numbers anyways, are based on just the average points, a 3% worse offense than average, resulting in an increase there to 21 for the amount of points that the Chiefs allowed. That adjusted, of course. So same logic applies to the losing team, just points for, points against again, except just adjusting for the winning team's offense and defense. And if you can see here, Texans points allowed, adjusted anyways, drops down to 29 due to how strong, of course, the Chiefs' almighty offense is at this point. So that's the logic behind those ratings. And once you've calculated those, so you just pull in the simple ratings that we calculated. We then calculate an adjusted points for and against for both winning and losing teams. And then we can start to pull those back into the rating sheet and formulate an adjusted rating set. So that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to unhide the columns here. We have a points for, except this time adjusted. We're using the same logic as the points for and against columns. So we're just going to use the sum ifs. And then rather than calling the points for and points against columns, winning team points for and losing team points for, we're going to call the adjusted points for and against columns. And using similar logic, use the two sum if statements, add them together, divide by 16, and then we just scale those to 100 as well. And using them once again, very similar formulas, in fact the exact same, just referencing different cells. So we actually get, for the Cardinals, as you can see here with the offensive delta, we get a 4.4 increase in offensive rating, but also a 4.4 increase in defensive rating, which denotes a worse off rating. So that's that you can see the change in offense and defensive ratings there, adjusted, from the original to adjusted ratings. And so there's some pretty significant ones. A 9.8 decrease to the Colts offensive rating based on their schedule that they played, and then an 8.5 decrease in defensive rating for the Lions based on their schedule. So they had a pretty brutal season, but you could argue that's partially down to the strong schedule, I guess. But anyways, so moving on from that, now that we have an adjusted rating set and an original rating set, we could just choose to use the adjusted rating set as the final ratings, or we could weight them a little bit, and that's what I've chosen to do just to kind of demonstrate some techniques you can use in your own data set of weighting ratings. So the weight I've chosen to use, I will showcase here on the results page, which this is going to be the final page where I showcase the results of the win percentages and line and total based on the simulations. But like I said earlier, I did want to compile the significant ratings on this sheet. And standard deviation here, we have an 8.2, which I can talk about in a second. Average points, we have 24.8, which I already talked about, of course, and we're referencing a bunch of times. I actually didn't reference this cell at all. We just stuck in the static 24.8, but I wasn't going to change that. However, the weight, though, is important to be able to change, and so making sure to reference this cell. So it's as easy as just changing this number, and then it just automatically changes the weight to the ratings based on the reference cell, of course. So that's how we're going to do it, though. So to actually weight these ratings, we just multiply the original rating by 1 minus the weight that we want for the adjusted ratings. And then we also then multiply the adjusted rating and multiply that by the weight that we want for the adjusted rating. And then we just sum those two numbers up. And that's how we arrive at this final 106 for the Cardinals. But if we were to if we were to go back and say, okay, I actually want the weight at 85% for the adjusted ratings, then you can see that number changes to a 107 based on the increase in weight to the adjusted ratings. And of course, the Cardinals' adjusted offense 4.4 points higher than the unadjusted offense. So that's how we get to the ratings. And once you've have come to the conclusion of those final ratings about how you want them, formatted and calculated, then we can start to set up the simulations here. And for the simulations, we're going to need standard deviation. Now this standard deviation here, I just did very quickly. This is you want to be able to take these entire two columns and calculate it all at once. But just to save a little bit of time, I averaged them, and I'm basically just taking the average of the average, which is 8.2. But you'll definitely want to average the entirety of this thing because that is not correct math right there. But once again, just saving a little time. And this model itself is not meant to, perform at a high level. Merely showcase the foundation of the model that you can create yourself. So using 8.2. You could also just use a flat 8, but once again, I'd probably look at the historic numbers and get a little bit more data rather than the 250 roughly games that I have that are in this sheet here. So let's actually set up the format or the actual formatting of the simulations here. And this is something I've showcased a few times before throughout my videos. Of course, simulations are a popular subject on this channel, specifically in Excel. And to set this up here, first I'm just calling in the team. Now I've actually set it up as well where I can actually change this to any of all 32 teams in the NFL using a list function. And to do a list function, just to refresh your guys' memories for those who have already seen my videos, you go to data validation, you select on the cell, and then the validation criteria, you're going to select a list, and then the source, you're going to just highlight and select the source of data that you want to be included in your list. In this sense, we highlight ratings A2 through 33, and that's just going to be all the teams. And then what I can do now is select a new team. And as you see, if I select the Seahawks, when I go to simulations, because the reference is results F10, then the Seahawks will be referenced there and changed, or whatever team is selected. But we're going to be, of course, focusing on the Super Bowl matchup between the Chiefs and Buccaneers. So going back to the sims now that we've got the teams called in, we're just going to do an index match, and you'll see that'll change. If I change a new team, the ratings will change that are in there because the index match is based off of this cell, which is referencing that list selection. And we're pulling in the ratings here for the Buccaneers from the rating sheet. So using index match, you can take a quick look at those formulas there. Very same idea for the Chiefs, just pulling it in from the rating sheet and referencing the team name in C2. And now we're actually going to set up the simulations themselves, and this is where you can decide, how many simulations do I want. And this should be based on, I'd say, one, your computer's performance, your performance of the Excel application, your computer, like how much it can withstand, and then also what exactly you're simulating. So here we're just simulating a single game. And this for me is not we don't need to be all that precise, so I'm just going to do 5,000 so it's quick and easy. But you can do more than that. I mean, I've done up to 50,000 I think on here, but it really depends on how many items you're simulating at one time. So if you're simulating the season results of all 32 teams in the league, you probably want to consider using about 10,000 to 20,000. It's not something that not a number that causes too much variance, but also not a number that causes your computer to crash. So yeah, just something to consider there. And of course, if you want to move platforms and go over to like to Python or R or something like that, then yeah, it becomes much easier to do more simulations without having to worry about anything crashing. But when it comes to Excel, you're still relatively limited there. So just to show you how to set up the amount of simulations here, you can just do a nice little series, and you're going to want to select columns, so it goes down a column rather than across a row. And then for me, of course, I'm just doing 5,000. And then I just hit OK, and it's not going to change anything there because I've already done it. But as you can see, it counts all the way down to 5,000 at one at a time. And then we can actually simulate this thing. So let's set up the actual simulation itself. So we're going to select, starting in the column beside your norm inverse formulas. And actually, shoot, I forgot to grace over the most important part almost, which is the norm inverse formula. So to actually calculate this thing, the formula that's going to run it, it's going to be a norm inverse, and I've already talked about this many times on videos before, so I'll just talk about the structure of this specific one. Of course, for the probability, we're going to be doing the rand function, which returns a normally distributed number between 0 and 1. For the mean, this represents like the static projected points for each team of the game, and so to calculate that in this scenario, we're doing the offense multiplied by the opposition defense divided by 100, and then after that calculation, this number now results in the essentially scaled to 100 number of the projected points. Then we divide that by 100 and then multiply it by the average points, and then that represents our static points projection for the Buccaneers. And of course, that's the number that will be simulated. And then we just reference the standard deviation, which of course is in results B2, and that's a static cell. And that's how we get to the norm inverse formula there for the Buccaneers. Same idea for the Chiefs. And these two numbers represent one simulation. And then when it comes to the deriving, or basically calculating whether it's a win or loss, very simple if statement here. So if the Buccaneers total is greater than the Chiefs, it's a 1, representing a win, denoting a win. If it's not, then it's 0. And same for the Chiefs. If their score is greater than the Buccaneers, then it's a 1, denoting a win. If it's not, then it results in a 0, denoting a loss. So now that that's all set up, we can go ahead and actually simulate this thing, and then I will talk about how to pull the information in to present, and that'll be the video. So let's go ahead and do this thing. So what if analysis, of course, data table, and you're going to, of course, like I said, select starting from A9 or the cell to the left of the first norm inverse calculations that you've done. And then also the cell, I could just do this in the first simulation cell, but I've done it above. For the column input cell, you can just do A9 in this scenario and hit OK. And it shouldn't take too long because it is only 5,000 and it's only two teams. Here we go. There's all of the simulations there. You could round these numbers as well, but that would create a scenario where you could have ties, and then of course, then you'd have to go ahead and calculate overtime as well. So in this sense, I've just left them unrounded. And going to the results, we have the Buccaneers winning 54% of the time in this set of simulations, the Chiefs winning 46%. And to calculate that, all you have to do is just average the columns of the win or loss binary result in the simulation cell. So looking at the simulations here, we're just averaging column E for the Buccaneers. So that would be E9 through E, whatever it is, E10 through 5009, I think it is, and then same for the Chiefs, but just column F. So that's how you derive the win probabilities. And then to actually get to the line-total concatenation, by the way, concat is a very useful formula when it comes to combining text and dynamic cell references. So looking at this calculation here, it's a nested, ignore the if error, but it's essentially some nested average formulas inside a concat statement, and then we're going to be just making a few calculations inside this thing. So ignore this first part. I'll talk about that in a second. This round and then average represents the line, so that's like the betting spread essentially. And so to calculate that, you simply just average the amount of points scored throughout the simulations by the Buccaneers, and then subtract the amount of points scored by the Chiefs. And then if that number, which is going to be referencing this formula again here, so if that number if the Buccaneers average is greater than the Chiefs, We're not adding anything in front of that. But if it isn't, then we add a plus, because then the Chiefs are favorites and the Buccaneers are underdogs, so we have to add that plus in front of it just for the format of the betting line. But anyways, going back to this round, we're also going to be multiplying that round statement. That's the result of the averages, calculating the line. We're going to be multiplying that by -1 to formulate that to a betting line. So, for example, since the Buccaneers are favorites, the result of an average would actually result in a positive number for them. So we want that to be a negative number, so it displays the -1 and whatever it ends up being, -1.5, -1 for the Buccaneers. And then we also are going to nest that whole thing inside a round statement. So we just round it to 1 decibel, so it's not too ugly with a bunch of decimals off the back of that thing. Anyways, and then we're going to split that with a nice little dash there, just to make it presentable, so they're not on top of each other. And then we finish it off calculating the total, which is just the average of the Buccaneers average, or the scores, so it's simulations, and then add that to the average of the Chiefs scores in the simulations, and then we're going to round that to 1 decimal as well, and that's how we get to the total. And yeah, we're probably going to nest, I think we nested that whole thing in an if error, just to make sure if it returns an error, it'll return a blank string, and that's how we get to that final calculation there. So Buccaneers are 1-point favorites, total of about 54, and 54.3% to win. The Buccaneers are, and if actually were to change this to another team, the Eagles, you can see how that changes the results of the simulations. Unfortunately, I don't have it embedded where a new Eagles logo will pop up with the changing of the team, but it is possible to do. I'm pretty certain. I actually haven't really messed too much with images in Excel, but yeah, definitely possible to make your Excel presentations or Excel spreadsheets look very presentable. So that is exactly how to simulate the Super Bowl. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will be back for more very soon, and if you guys have any recommendations for new videos, let me know in the comments. I'll see you later.